Hello and welcome. My name is Robert O'Byrne and today I'm in Kilruddery in County Wicklow. Kilruddery has been home to the Brabazon family, Earls of Meath, for more than 400 years. And it also contains what is unquestionably the finest 17th century Baroque garden, not just in Ireland, but in these islands. I'm here to talk to Finola Reid, who is a garden historian and conservationist who's been responsible for the restoration of a great many historic country house gardens all over Ireland, not least the walled gardens here at Kilruddery. I hope you enjoy what follows. Finola, thank you so much for meeting us here today in what is a very busy Kilruddery garden, because this place has become so popular thanks to the hard work of the RDs in recent years. It's always overrun with people. We're lucky to find what is a relatively quiet perch here. Let's take advantage of it, first of all, by you telling me a little bit about your background.
Well, I would have grown up with parents and grandparents that were keen gardeners and a long, long back garden in my own home. And so therefore I was always keen. And we also were on a bus route to the National Botanic Gardens. So anytime my father said, "Where will we go today on a Sunday?" I always said, "Botanic Gardens." So off we went. And then a few children on the road. When we got to be teenagers, we all went off together like the Bash Street kids to go to Glasnevin on the bus. So I loved it. And then I remember being in school and career guidance and the head nun saying to me, "You've shown no interest whatsoever in any of the subjects I've dealt with. What are you going to do with the rest of your life?" And my heart sank and I thought, what am I going to say now? She was a brilliant person. And I said, "I want to work in the Botanic Gardens," knowing that was just a pipe dream.
Yeah.
And a week later she called me back into the office and showed me an advertisement for the scholarship for the course in horticulture in Glasnevin, and my face, I read it and, and she said, "No, you apply for that and you get it." And I did exactly as I was ordered to do.
You did apply and you did get it.
I did get it.
So after you'd finished your course at Glasnevin, what happened next?
I went out and I worked in the nursery in the beginning. Then I worked as a horticultural technician in University College in 2 different sites for the next couple of years. And then I decided, I challenged the professor as to what my prospects were for my future.
Right.
And he told me that I was at that level and that would be it. And I had been doing a lot of work with the students who were doing research projects and they were going on to become masters of horticulture. And I thought, that's a bit Irish. So I said, right, I'm going to leave. And I went off grape picking that autumn. And when I came back to Dublin, I looked for a job and got it. And then I went grape picking the following autumn because I had such good fun in France. Wonderful opportunity, the hardest work I have ever done. And over the next couple of years, I kept my eye on the ball. And then I decided to apply for a job in Glasnevin on the gardening staff.
Right.
Applied for the job, but didn't get it. It was parked, I realised later, but there's a story behind that. And then I got the opportunity to apply for the herbarium, the National Herbarium, which was now in Glasnevin. And I went in there as a herbarium assistant and got fantastic experience with the person in charge of the herbarium, Morris Scannell, Donald Sinnott, who went on to become director in the National Botanic Gardens, and Brian Morley, who went on to become director of Adelaide Botanic Gardens. So I got fantastic training in native plants. Then the job on the outdoor staff came up again, and I cheekily applied a second time, and I got it.
Good.
And I was appointed into the section to deal with the British and Irish native plants and medicinal and poisonous plants. And of course, you know that poison is a woman's weapon. So I was into a section
If you say
then.
so.
Trust me.
Yeah.
I was in a section then learning about all the native plants in Ireland and building up the collection and poisonous and medicinal and all that sort of wonderful stuff. And that went on, and then I got moved to the fronts, as we called it, around the director's house, the front borders, all of the geranium house, the succulents,
the most
all that
public
stuff.
area.
Very much up front. Has to look really good all day, every day, non-stop, all year round. And I was there, and then I was moved to the curvilinear range, and I was there for a number of years. So I knew every bit of rust in the curvilinear range before it was restored.
This is pre-restoration in the mid-1990s.
Pre-restoration, absolutely. When I was bored on a Saturday afternoon and I had nothing better to do, I'd be scraping the rust off the beautiful cast iron finials and various things, and complaining that They should have been restored before now. So I was there, and we took turns as the gardening staff. We were on duty at weekends, so I'd be in the palm house maybe one weekend, or the cactus house, or the orchid house. So we moved around.
So you got experience in a whole range of areas, therefore, and understanding and appreciating different varieties of plants while you were doing all of
plant
this.
geography was big in my head because I loved geography in school, and this was fascinating stuff. I was learning all the time. And we were training the students, because when you were in charge of a section of the grounds, you also had 2 or 3 students with you. And the job was to train them in practical work. So you had really good students and some dopes.
Not quite so good.
But a lot of them went on to great things afterwards.
So one way or another, you've had a lot to do with Kilruddery over several decades. But we'll come back to Kilruddery. I want to just return to what we were talking about the garden restoration scheme that began in the mid-1990s. To your mind, what were some of the key places with which you were involved in restoring and saving them for the nation, really?
We restored Kylemore Abbey, the wall garden in Kylemore Abbey, which was hugely important in its heyday. And the history is fantastic. It started at a certain point in time in the Victorian period, had a wonderful story about the man who created the whole thing. It was Kylemore Castle before it became Kylemore Abbey, which was now part of the Benedictine Order's properties. So that was hugely important. And it was a place that had gone completely derelict. So I remember the day I walked into that wall garden for the first time, and I got overheated, even in wet Connemara. I got so excited at the thought of it. And I remember thinking when I was a kid growing up, I was being threatened by my mother. If I didn't behave myself, I'd be sent to the nuns in Kylemore Abbey as a boarder. And then I suddenly was in this wild garden, and it was a magic project. It was a wonderful project to go through. Another project that was a really important project was Woodstock in Inishtig in Kilkenny, which was owned by the Tighe family of William Tighe and Mary Tighe, a hugely important historic property. And it was being leased by Kilcher, the Irish Forestry Board. And we managed to negotiate a transfer of the lease from Kilcher to Kilkenny County Council, and they undertook the matching funding with our funding. So that was a huge success story.
It is a big, and Woodstock, like Kylemore, attracts enormous numbers of visitors now. One of the outcomes of those garden restorations was precisely what was intended. Tourism went up.
Right. And interesting too, we were recruiting people for all these projects. That was part of my job, was to pick the right person to manage the team of people who were going to do the actual physical work in the gardens. And for Woodstock in Kilkenny, we selected a young landscape architect, freshly out of college, and I said hadn't been contaminated, Claire Murphy, and the head gardener, John Delaney. And they're still there to this day, the two of them, running that place. And they're a brilliant pair. And the place, I was in it about 3 years ago, it was looking fantastic after all these years. So I thought that's a real success story. We did Belvedere House.
In Westmeath.
In Westmeath, which was owned by Westmeath County Council. So that was a bit of a struggle at the beginning, but we finally got our way in doing the right thing by it, because in the beginning the plan was only to do a huge visitor centre and very little work in the pleasure grounds and gardens. But we turned that project right around and did the follies and the pleasure grounds and gardens, and reduced the visitor centre to a reasonable size. So that was a huge win from our point of view in terms of managing the money, because we only had a very small amount of money and we needed to spread the money right across in sensible ways. We worked with a number of private garden owners like Ballinlough Castle in County Meath, Loughcrew House.
Loughcrew in County Meath as
in
well.
In Meath as well, exactly.
And then you did a number of projects in the Greater Dublin area. I know you were involved with Newbridge, the Newbridge Domain.
Newbridge, Ardgillan Castle and Malahide Castle. Not huge restoration projects, but specific projects within those places with Fingal, and they were very good to work with.
And again, somewhere like Malahide has this wonderful wall garden, which Milo de Talbot was responsible for creating in the last century.
Yes.
And luckily it has been saved and it's been looked after.
Exactly. We also worked with Marley Park, which was done nearly right down County Council. And again, the people that were involved in that project were actually brilliant people to deal with. because other places I had to kind of beat them up slightly, metaphorically, to get their head in gear about the concepts of restoration and conservation and renovation. So it was quite challenging, because with 26 projects spinning around in my head and applications still coming in, I had to be fairly efficient in the way I dealt with people, and also to be kind to people, because some people weren't understanding what they had. It was only when we went in and looked, I would say to me, do you realise what you have here? This is unique, or this is the only third one I've ever seen, and you know, and such and such and such and such. So it went on, and we grew with those people. So by the time the grant had finished being done and the project was completed, and we were leaving and letting them get on with life and being in tourism, we felt that a lot of them had really grasped the whole thing. And we actually did some funding here in Kilruddery.
Really?
We did the gilding of the main gates, which are magnificent, and we did the roof of the orangery. I remember the day I had to go up and look at the roof, and I had a skirt on. I had to go up on a ladder, to my great embarrassment. And it was the last day I ever wore a skirt coming to Killruddery, because I thought I could be asked to go up onto a roof at any given time.
I would have thought you would have learnt before then. It seems to me the project that you were involved with, saving and restoring a lot of these historic gardens around Ireland, there were two outcomes. One was the gardens themselves were restored and therefore saved for future generations. But the second factor, I think, was it increased public awareness of gardens, particularly historic gardens, and their importance for us all.
Correct. And we also raised awareness amongst the garden owners in some cases. In some cases, garden owners didn't realise how good the garden they had and how important and significant they were historically. Because they were just out there at the back of the house, as it seemed. So all of that generated a lot of more interest. And because we were trying to deal with cultural and heritage tourism, we were trying to get across the message as well that these places were huge repositories of information, of history. For example, with some applications, when I went out to meet these people, these owners, I realised that the garden wasn't Victorian, or it wasn't a Victorian wall garden. It was actually a Georgian or a Regency wall garden. And in some cases I came across estates that were Cromwellian in origin. And that got me very excited, being interested in history. I said, God, this place goes back to the time of Cromwell.
Yeah.
And some of these people I dealt with, we raised the awareness with them, and then some of them declined to take on board the offer of taking the grant, because it meant a time frame. They had to do it within, they had to match the funding, they had to employ a head gardener as part of the deal, and they were going to be monitored for 10 years.
Yeah.
And it kind of made them nervous. So I spent a lot of time. For example, God rest him now, but Jeremy Brown
Yes.
in Westport House.
Yes.
I spent 7 hours in his company that day,
Yeah.
talking to him about Westport House and the grounds and gardens, and encouraging him to come in and get involved in the project. And he said at the end of all of that, he was a wonderful guy to deal with. And we would have done the Italian garden. He had actually demolished the Italian garden. And I said to him, can I go upstairs? Do you mind if I go upstairs to one of the bedrooms with you? And he looked at me very strangely. And we went up and looked out, and it was on a hot summer's day, and you could still see the impression of where the Italian garden had been. I said, we would restore that. Because I had been to the garden on the Italian lakes connected with the Browns. So I knew what I was at. So 7 hours later, he said to me, I can't match. I haven't got the money to match.
Yeah.
And I felt so sorry for him, because it was a magnificent place.
I think that was and still is a problem for a lot of people, is matching funding.
Yes.
But
Yes.
let's come back here to Kilruddery and your work on the wall garden. What was it like when you started
The wall garden.
here?
The wall garden itself.
Yes.
Lock gates
Okay.
that I used to peer through all the time. Lady Meath, Anthony's grandmother, gardened in there. So there was an area, as you walk into the wall garden, you still have the camellias and you still have the peonies and the various shrubs, just for the first so many yards in. And then after that, it was sort of overgrown. You couldn't see the paths very clearly again. All the walls were covered in ivy and various bits and bobs. So I took a good extensive photographic record of the whole garden, even at that stage. And I started encouraging them to do something. My idea here, the strategy from my point of view here was, Kilruddery is such a special place, such a magnificent landscape, such a historic landscape. And part of the beauty of this place is the solitude and the spirit of the place when you're in here, with the ponds and the hedges, and you are stepping back in the centuries when you're in Kilruddery. And if we could take a lot of the tourism into the walled garden, where there's always busyness and activity of flowers and shrubs and trees and fruit and everything, an awful lot of people would come, they'd go into the shop, they'd go into the walled garden and leave the rest of the magnificent grounds and gardens to the solitude and peacefulness that it always had. And from the very first day I came into Kilruddery years ago, even before we were talking about grants or opening up or anything, I remember as a young person coming here years ago and thinking how magnificent this place was. I had died and gone to heaven when I came here. And it's only when I went to Italy, taking groups on trips to gardens in Italy, I realised how similar Kilruddery was to these wonderful gardens that we saw in Italy and France.
Of
So
course.
I wanted to help it from the word go. So by encouraging the family to open the wall garden, it took the pressure off the rest of the grounds and gardens. Because at any day of the week, even when it's busy, if you walk along down towards the end of the long ponds and over that direction to the angles, you don't see too many people.
You can get happily lost.
Absolutely.
On your
so
own.
you still feel as if you're there in absolute solitude and enjoying the pleasure of the sounds of nature. So it's very special place. I think it's probably the most special garden that I've ever dealt with, and I love it dearly for that.
The walled garden here at Kilruddery, as you say, dates from around the 1830s. What are its most distinctive characteristics, do you think?
Well, perhaps the most impressive characteristic is that it survived. And it has survived because it's in the Brabazon family, so it's always been minded but not necessarily restored. So it's always been there but not abused or wrecked or built on or flattened as you see in other places. But the other thing was, in its heyday, we still can see the remains of the old glasshouse, the main glasshouse range, which must have been absolutely impressive in its heyday. But that hasn't been restored, that part yet. But we did restore one of the glass houses in recent years. I was asked to oversee that project, and that was again a wonderful opportunity to come back to Kilruddery yet again to do another bit of work. Because we had done the glass house, we did 5 glass houses in the frame yard in Fota down in County Cork, and I was involved in that project, advising on the glass houses and on the layout and the planting scheme. So it was grist to the mill when I was asked to do this one. And Anthony and Finola were keen to do something, but they weren't sure. So I said, go down to Fota. Go down and see what we've done in Fota. We have the expertise from the Fota project. We know what wood to use. We know what to do with all of the collect up all the bits. Because when I first looked at the glass house here for Anthony, they were already demolishing it with chainsaw through the metals. I said, stop everything. We have to record everything before we do it. So the original metals are back in that glass house now. The original walls are there again, restored and cleaned and pointed up. We excavated inside. It was garden archaeology because we excavated into that glass house to get down to see exactly how it was constructed. And it was actually a pit house. And it's a mighty long glass house which is now used all the time for production of vegetables and seedlings and all sorts of stuff. So it was a great achievement. I mean, I will long for the day that the next glasshouse might be restored in years to come. But they are very expensive affairs to do. But this one provides a very important function now for the growing all the plants that they're producing here. And then all the stuff that's here that is being produced in Kilruddery is being used in their cafes and the farmers' market and in their restaurant and I presume in the house as well. So
I think as much as they can produce is used very quickly.
Exactly.
I don't think anything goes to waste.
Nothing
Nothing
goes
at all.
to waste.
Which again shows you how helpful it is to have restored these gardens, because particularly after the last 18 months, I think people are much more conscious, first of all, of gardens and the importance of green space, but also many more people are aware of growing their own fruit and vegetables. So walled gardens have become a much more significant presence as a result.
This is the best thing that ever happened in terms of walled gardens and garden tourism is the lockdown.
There's lockdown.
Because people suddenly realised they couldn't go to all the fiddly-fad things, shopping centres and foreign holidays. And they suddenly realised they had their own spaces to deal with, and they all started. And I'm enjoying it, really, saying, well, you know, we told you for years.
Not everyone would necessarily agree with you. You have sort of become the go-to person by default when it comes to historic walled gardens.
I would think so. Because I've seen so many of them and recorded so many of them that it's almost, as I walk in now, I know what to expect. And if I don't find it, I'm saying, I haven't found such and such yet.
Yeah.
I'm looking at, say, brick bonds. Is it Flemish bond? Is it English bond? Is it garden bond? I'm looking at other walls around the place. I'm able to say, when I walk into a walled garden, like with Kilruddery here, that fig.
Yes.
I know only about 3-4 fig trees that are growing outdoors, in my experience. In my own back garden, when it never fruits. The one in the enclosed garden in Glasnevin, which fruited the odd time. The one in the mews of Sybil Connolly's house in Marion Square, which I used to prune for her. And the fig in Killruddery, which is the best of the lot and would have pounds of fruit off every year. So when I walk into a walled garden, I'm saying, there's probably a fig here, or there's probably a glass house here, or there's probably a soap pond or something here. And I'm very familiar now with what I call the hierarchy of the paths. I'm able to know now which way the workers would have come into a walled garden and proceeded around, compared to the way the family of the house would have proceeded into the same walled garden and walked around. So there was a hierarchy, even in the quality of the finish of the paths. Obviously you didn't have fine gravel on the paths, which were workers' paths. You had gravel on the paths for the important honoured guests and esteemed friends.
Well, it's just like in a house, you know, you have the main staircase for the family and then the back staircase for the servants.
Precisely.
And you have the equivalent.
I never thought about that until I did Duckett's Grove, and I started
In County
analysing.
Carlow,
yes,
yeah,
I did the two
yeah.
walled gardens in Duckett's Grove in County Carlow for Carlow County Council, and God bless the county manager at the time who bought the place and then handed the two walled gardens to me to go restore them and plant them and do the planting designs and schemes and everything. And started to analyse. I said, right, now I know what happens here. The family and the honoured guests would come out that door and they'd walk through the little woodland and they'd come to the walled garden as a secret garden, and the old casement door from the old Georgian house was now the door into the walled garden. And when you walked in that door, you got this fantastic vista right up the middle of the walled garden, of the main walled garden, to this magnificent range of glass houses. And then the other walled garden, which had been an orchard, and then you saw when it became an enclosed orchard. So we've restored those too. Unfortunately, in recent years,
It hasn't been as well.
Sinking
let's
again.
just say it hasn't been as well maintained as might be
it's
the
getting
case. Let's
tired,
be polite.
very tired.
Let's try. Let me finish by asking you something now. My last question for today, Finola. What is there that is distinctive about Irish gardens and Irish walled gardens specifically, or are there distinctive traits or characteristics to Irish gardens and walled gardens specifically that you can think of?
I think, from what I understand about the whole thing, is the Irish climate, topography and everything else is very similar to the Scottish one. There's a lot of walled gardens in Scotland, there's a lot of walled gardens in Ireland, less so in England, and certainly in the southern counties of England. It's to do with climate. Some people would say in Ireland, of course they would say this, wouldn't they, that the big walls around walled gardens were to keep the Irish out and keep the Anglo-Irish in. But I think it was all to do with creating microclimate. And as time went on, you could see the development in the understanding of the dynamics of a walled garden and the heating and the microclimate, and why the walls were certain heights and places. And the aspect where a walled garden was situated was important as well. In the Georgian period, it was close. But I actually think that the Irish walled garden is a direct descendant of the Castle Bawn.
Yes.
If you think about it.
Yeah, it's a continuation of
It
the
evolved.
enclosure around the building,
Correct.
the main residence.
And it was a protective enclosure in times of attack. You brought your cattle in, you had your herbs,
Yeah.
whatever. You had the basic poisons and medicinal plants, whatever you needed to poison your enemies or cure your cattle. And as time went on, it moved away. So by the time you had a Victorian walled garden, and typical of that is the Kilmore Abbey one, which is, what, a mile away from the Abbey Castle, You have Tintern Abbey is a good example as well. Tintern Abbey was an abbey in its heyday.
That's right.
Then it got built upon and built upon and built upon. You had this wonderful, several houses built and attached. It was magnificent. I remember it when it was like that. And the wall garden was part of that complex. The Coakley family were there.
That's right.
And then the OPW acquired it. And they took all of the buildings down except the old
Alas.
abbey. And now the wall garden is off down there somewhere in splendid isolation with no connection
To
the
the house.
abbey.
Yeah. But
So
on the
it's
other hand,
interesting to watch this happen in these different sites, the way things have evolved,
it
and
is
why
great,
they have.
though, at Tintern in County Wexford, that the local community have embraced the wall garden there, for example,
We're very lucky.
and have taken it on as a project, and it's a entirely locally run organisation that's restored it and runs it as a proper wall garden.
Yes, yes. I was involved a couple of years ago, probably the last one I did now, over the last 2 years ago, 3 years ago now, it must be 3 years ago, Mount Bellew in Galway. Now, I never expected to find a magnificent walled garden in East Galway. Because in my head, I was thinking, what's in East Galway? But when I went to Mount Bellew, I was astounded to see this wonderful walled garden, which again, a local development group were hoping to restore. And it was just superb. The quality of workmanship was in it. And there was still vegetation there lingering. And some of the old glasshouse sites were still there, and the potting shed sites. So I did a report full of love for the place in the hope that it would activate local interest and perhaps local grant aid from Galway County Council. But I think the group are probably struggling now. The last while has been difficult for a lot of these development groups because they weren't able to get together to do work.
No.
Everything has gone into abeyance at the moment. But hopefully we're going to emerge out of this crisis of lockdown with a renewed vigour in people's minds about the importance of these places and more respect shown to them, and the fact that they're huge opportunities for the future for all kinds of things, even for outdoor education for children, for example. I mean, you can hear today the sound of children in the distance, and really, I learned how to garden as a child. I was only a toddler when I was given my own vegetable garden by my parents. So if you don't catch them when they're young, and rolling down the hill in Glasnevin as a teenager, before we got thrown out for being messing, and jumping from rock to rock in the rock garden. But these are the memories that children keep, and they become the gardeners of the future. And I hope this is what's happening at the moment, with children being brought into these places now that we're coming out of lockdown, and starting to remember these memories later on. Teenagers, getting their first face-to-face with gardens in an enjoyable way. Maybe even the ones that are drinking behind trees, you never know. But you have to sow that seed in a child's head, I think, at a very early stage. And very often when you talk to gardeners and why they went into horticulture, it's because of that. Their family were keen gardeners, or their grandmother was a gardener, whatever. And it carried on with them.
Well, let's hope, as you say, that one of the beneficial outcomes of lockdown is a greater appreciation of our historic gardens here in Ireland.
Here, here.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Finola as much as I did. The next in this series is going to be with Neil Porteous, who many of you will know for his extraordinary restoration work at the gardens of Mount Stewart in County Down. Neil is now working in another wonderful garden, Annesgrove in County Cork, and that's where I'm going to be talking with him in a few weeks hence. You'll be able to see this conversation on Friday, August the 20th, so I hope very much that you'll be able to join us on that date. I look forward to seeing you all then, and in the meantime, thank you for watching today, and stay safe, everyone. Goodbye.